All right, today we are going to enter into the question zone with Dr. Tim Stratton. I am your host, Josh Klein, as usual. As we get into it, please like, share, and subscribe to this video. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. We've been running through questions that Tim had asked of Calvinists recently in a video that months ago that had been released on Trinity Radio, and we ourselves are going through the questions and some generic responses to that. So today's question is about the deity of deception argument and trusting the Bible. So let's take a look at the question and then let's get into it.
All right. Consider the deity of deception argument. Premise 1. If Ed is true, then God determines all Christians to affirm some false theological beliefs. 2. If God determines all Christians to affirm some false theological beliefs, then God is deceptive, and his word, the Bible, cannot be trusted, and Christians cannot have assurance of salvation. 3. God is not deceptive, his word can be trusted, and Christians can have assurance of salvation. 4. Therefore, God does not determine all Christians to affirm some false theological beliefs. And 5. Therefore, Ed is false. So here's my question. With this argument in mind, what justifiable reasons do you have for believing what was inspired by a deity of deception? Why should you believe the Bible if it were inspired by a deity of deception?
Here's the response. Here's a response that might come across, or that I've come across. It says, I don't like how Tim argues, because if I accepted the fact that God was a deity of deception in a negative way, in the sense that he's blameworthy for determining falsehoods or something like that, to his believers, his fellow believers, then yeah, that would be wrong. So what do you have to say about that? Like that response?
Yeah, well, I just say that it's irrelevant if this Calvinist subjectively likes how I argue. I mean, what's important is if the premises of my argument can be shown to be true or even probably true, and does the conclusion follow logically? Second, this guy misses the point of my argument. My case says nothing about being determined in a positive or a negative way. It says nothing even implicitly about God being blameworthy for anything. So let's just grant that I could be determined in a positive way to affirm false theological beliefs. Great. And let's suppose that God can't be blamed for it, or that he shouldn't be blamed for it. Great. The problem is we're still deceived by a praiseworthy deity of deception. It kind of gets absurd, right? But I mean, here's the deal. I've made it clear that I grant the absurd idea that God has morally sufficient reasons for whatever manner he deceives all of his followers. So this objector, and I've heard this several times, but objectors like these make it clear that they don't understand the argument when they say things like, well, that would be wrong, speaking about this being wrong for God to do, or for being blameworthy. My argument is not about attacking God's character. It is about attacking our lack of an epistemic foundation to obtain theological knowledge. And that's what we're all about here is we're trying to get closer to truth. We're trying to gain theological knowledge, and we're arguing with others who suppose that they have theological knowledge. So what the deity of deception argument does is shows that if you affirm exhaustive divine determinism, or Ed, then you have all these undercutting defeaters that destroy your justification for your theological claims, and therefore they're just mere theological claims. It does not count as theological knowledge. So if you affirm Ed, you can't even know that Ed is true. So everything crumbles. There's no epistemic foundation here. The foundation to gain knowledge crumbles, and so that's why I call this epistemic meltdown.
Yeah, I think part of the problem here is this assumption that it's an attack of God's character because we say stuff like you cannot trust things
Yeah.
like that. And we
Mhm.
think, well, that means he lacks character. That's not the type of trust. Now, we could get
Right.
into the character issue if we want,
Mhm.
but that's not the type of trust you're talking about. You're not talking about trust
Right.
because of character. You're talking about trust because of consistency. What's determining you to think a certain way? How can I really trust my mental faculties? It's the same. It's the same thing you use when we talk about naturalism, right? So it's like the reason you can't trust your reasoning processes isn't because your brain is evil, because your synapses
Mhm.
are firing in an evil way. It's because it's
Yeah.
untrustworthy. So I
Right.
think that's
But yeah, you're right. I'm not attacking God's character here any more than I'm attacking the character of physics and chemistry when I say, look, if physics and chemistry is determining all of your beliefs about metaphysics, then you can't trust your beliefs about metaphysics. It's not because physics and chemistry is evil. It's just untrustworthy to deliver truth regarding metaphysics.
Mhm.
And so if your idea of God is that he determines all things, then even if he's morally perfect for doing so and has great reasons and intentions for doing so, well, now this deity is because all these Christians and everybody else affirms contradictory theological beliefs. Now we're in a position that where we realize, well, even all these epistemic peers and all these Christians, even Christian philosophers having all these different ideas and beliefs. Well, if God is the one determining all of these, even for a really good reason, now even if we're not attacking God's character, so I'm not saying God's evil here, it's just we realize that God is an untrustworthy source of theological beliefs because we realize, wow, look at all of these committed and mature theologians with all these contradictory beliefs. Uh, Whatever is determining our thoughts here is pretty clumsy at getting us the truth. So, yeah, you're right. I'm not calling God evil. I'm just
Mhm.
saying, yeah, we can't trust this being to give us true theological beliefs. Bottom line.
Yeah. So okay, let's move beyond that now. So what if someone said then, well, there's no real support for the first premise of the argument. So let's move beyond what seems to be the implication of whether or not you trust or don't trust this deity in some nefarious way,
Mhm.
whatever. Now let's look at the argument, and they say, well, there's just no support for the first premise of this argument.
Well, that's like saying there's no support for premise one of the Kalam cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. I mean, sure, maybe there's one counterexample out there, but no one is aware of anything that begins to exist without a cause. So yeah, show us what this is. I mean, because nobody is aware of anything that begins to exist without a cause, just simply saying, well, maybe there's a counterexample out there. Well, okay, possibilities come cheap. What is it? We don't have an example of one. So, so therefore, the first premise of the Kalam is at least probably true. That is to say, it's unreasonable to reject it. So, I've heard this objection too many times. Recently from a Calvinist on YouTube. So for this YouTuber to reject the first premise of my argument is quite telling. It really shows how powerful this deity of deception argument is. I mean, remember, the first premise is simply this: if Ed is true, then God determines all Christians to affirm false theological beliefs. Now, that follows after one affirms both one, that God determines all things, and two, all Christians affirm at least one false theological belief, if not multitudes. So that's the typical position of the Ed Calvinist, the Calvinist who affirms exhaustive divine determination or determinism. So unless this guy truly believes that there's some infallible super pope out there who never gets theology wrong, that there's this super pope out there somewhere walking this planet, then he's got to say that every Christian and everybody else has some, at least one, if not multitudes, of false theological beliefs. Now, I know that most Calvinists are going to reject the idea of the Pope or a super Pope on top of that. So I just don't see any reason to reject premise one of my argument. It certainly seems probably true, to say the least.
Yeah. And the irony that I'm hearing here is this may play into the reason you use the term ed. Because
Right.
someone could maybe say, well, I don't really, I kind of reject that first premise because it's not all of these things. And you're like, well, remember, exhaustive means exhaustive, right?
Hmm.
So,
That's right.
uh, ironically, the some people would be the same people that would say, uh, don't use exhaustive because it's redundant.
Right.
um,
Right.
and then they might reject that first premise. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's
Exactly.
so let's move forward. So what if I've heard someone say this to try to defeat this argument. They've
Yeah.
said in a sarcastic way, if God determines us to lift weights, God is therefore a weightlifter.
Right.
If God determines us to sleep, therefore God is therefore a sleeper. If God determines us to drink beer, then God is a beer drinker. He says it doesn't make any sense that you can't say that if God determines us to be deceived, then God is a deceiver. There's no way to support uh, what you want to say, that God is therefore untrustworthy. But then we're back to the original question: what would make God untrustworthy? And then he says, of course, he's not. So
Yeah.
that's something that I ran across with, and this seems kind of. Well, no, I'll let you cover it. I'll let you cover it because I have my own thoughts. But why don't
Yeah.
you? You're the expert here. Why don't you? Why
Well,
don't you go?
I mean, that seems like a desperate attempt at playing a semantic game in order to try to escape the main problem here and the main point of the argument. So look, it logically follows that one, if God determines all things, and two, all people affirm false theological beliefs, then God determines all of our false theological beliefs. So if God determines all Christians and everybody else to affirm false theological beliefs, then, as I said earlier, God is an untrustworthy source of theological beliefs, even if it's for morally sufficient reasons. So I refer to a personal being who is an untrustworthy source of theological beliefs, the most important kind of beliefs, right? If Christianity is true, and it is. Um, so, so yeah, let me back up. I refer to a personal being who is an untrustworthy source of theological beliefs and determines everyone to get ultimate reality wrong as a deceiver. I refer to that personal being as a deceiver, but the argument passes no matter what you call this supernatural deity, right? Call him a god of mischief like Loki, or whatever you'd like. I don't care what you call him, but the problem still remains. So if God provides the antecedent conditions sufficient to necessitate all humans to possess false theological beliefs, then it's warranted, or it stands to reason to infer and refer to this deity as a deceiver. But call him whatever you'd like. If we call this being a deceiver or call this being a schmeceiver, it doesn't matter. The problem still remains. So here's my message to these Calvinist determinists, to these ed folks. Stop trying to avoid the main point and the thrust of my argument and just deal with the epistemological problem that this argument exposes. I mean, yes, if God causally determines all humans to drink beer, then it does not logically follow that God is a beer drinker himself. But, however, I did say this on another video. Um, uh, if God causally determines all people to drink beer, then it might make God guilty of procuring for minors, but that's another conversation, So anyway, this is a feeble attempt. And really, these feeble attempts really show how powerful the deity of deception argument is. The ed advocate must resort to semantic games instead of facing the defeaters that are right in front of their face and that are punching them in the face. Yeah, this problem still remains. So yeah, just please deal with the argument and stop trying to distract us with these irrelevant objections.
Yeah, it's one of those. This one was one of those things to me that was kind of like, okay, but you do realize that causing someone to believe something is different than causing someone to lift weights. Like those
Right.
those are different things. Like if I cause my child to lift weights because I tell them you have to lift weights because of X, Y, and Z. You won't get X, Y, and Z. Of course, that doesn't make me a weightlifter. That makes me force them to lift weights.
Right.
But if I say to them, oh no, that isn't true. The certain proposition isn't true, and you need to believe that it's not true. And then they have that belief that it's not true. Then I have deceived them, and I am a deceiver. So it's kind of like we understand these different categories, right?
Right.
We understand. So, like you said, it doesn't matter. You can call them whatever you like, but there's still the act of deception. There's still something going on there that we've been deceived, and maybe you don't like the word deceived. That's fine. We've been caused to believe something that's false. Okay, so
seems like deception to me, but call it what you want.
And it still gets back to the root of the problem. Okay, then how can we trust anything that would cause us to believe false things? How can we trust that they will deliver trustworthy material to us?
That's right.
Anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
You're right.
So another response that I've heard is someone that said, I don't think this is a particularly Calvinistic deterministic problem. I think this probably, or could be broadly, a Christian problem, especially if the Bible clearly states episodes or scenarios of divine deception.
Yeah, I've heard this many times, and I'm just going to say that's false. I mean, not only have I heard it many times, I've explained this many times. So here we go again. In Scripture, God only allows deception to those who oppose him or who are in sin as then an act of judgment. So as I recently explained at the EPS, at the Evangelical Philosophical Society, I gave a talk about this, and I said, look, if somebody, or if one examines his or her life and does not see a commitment to living in sin, then one doesn't have justification to believe that God would determine him to be deceived about theology and ultimate reality. If, however, one comes to see that he's made something an idol, I've been in danger of that before and been convicted on that, really had to deal with that. In fact, I think people often make theological positions idols in their lives. So, I mean, perhaps somebody has made Calvinism or determinism their idol. Then one has reason to doubt their beliefs about reality. If one is actively in sin, and we know that God allows people who are in rebellion or who are idolatrous to be deceived, and you recognize that you are in sin or worshiping an idol of some sort, then there's reason there's warrant to think, wow, maybe I might be in a position where I'm affirming all this, these false beliefs because God is allowing that as an act of judgment. So again, this is another good reason to strive to hate sin and live according to the law of Christ. I know I'm not perfect, but man, I strive to do that. And that's also why I surround myself with people who, like you, Josh, who hold me accountable, and others who definitely aren't impressed by Tim Stratton in any way. My wife is number one, and so many of you keep me accountable. I try to return the favor, but the more we're seeking God and seeking Christ and seeking truth, Jesus is the truth. If we are committed to truth, we see no instance in Scripture where God starts making people believe lies who love him and are seeking him and are seeking and wanting the truth more than anything else. It's only those who are rejecting truth and rejecting God who God allows to be deceived. So we can talk more about that, but I'll just leave it there for now.
Yeah, and while there is a difference between deception and lying, I think that you're right. Just a few passages that spring to mind in that instance is, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Let me in. He's willing to let you in. In Hebrews, God is a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him. Yes. And so he's not going to reward a person who's earnestly seeking him with deception. He's going to reward them with the truth, just like God does with Paul when he says, I prayed 3 times for this thorn to be removed from my flesh, and God doesn't hide the ball. God says, my grace is sufficient for you. That's not
Mhm.
deception. He's
Right.
not telling him the whole. He's not telling him the whole truth, right? He's not
Yeah.
saying, "Well, this is the exact reason
Mhm.
why I'm doing this to you." He's saying, "My grace is sufficient."
Yeah.
And
He's not giving him any false theological beliefs.
no, he's not.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, that passage of scripture, and I don't know if this is the reason God did it or not, but that passage of scripture has meant the world to so many people who have gone through
Yeah.
difficult pains that wouldn't be
Right.
removed, that perhaps this is a reason why God would do that or allow that to happen to Paul. But he's not deceiving him. He's rewarding him with the truth, even though for Paul, I'm sure that truth was really hard to hear.
Mhm.
I'm sure Paul was like,
Yeah.
seriously, no, just take it away. So
Right.
anyway, that's where my mind goes too. I think you can back what you're saying up scripturally as well, not just that in narratives there are moments of deception. Of course there are, but the question of why does the deception occur? And then if scripture is consistent about God's character over time and God is a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him, it wouldn't follow to me that he would then deceive the people who earnestly seek him.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
so that's neither here nor there. Let's move on. Before we move on, I want to invite those of you who are watching us here to join the team. Join the team at FreeThinking Ministries, freethinkingministries.com/donate. We would love to have you on the team. We got all sorts of stuff coming up within the next year. We're very excited about where God is leading FreeThinking Ministries, and we need your help. We need your help to be on the team. So freethinkingministries.com/donate. Also, make sure you like this video, you subscribe, hit that notification bell. And last but not least, if you go to our website, freethinkingministries.com, you can actually sign up to be on an email list so that you are alerted anytime an article is released, anytime a podcast is released, all those sorts of things. Please follow us there. All right, let's get into this next portion. There are people, and I know, Tim, that there are these people because they have said it to me without without you knowing, that might say things like, well, it seems like Tim appeals to emotion or gets emotional or appeals to emotion when he's making these arguments. What would you have to say to people who levy that claim towards you?
I would say, look, I get it. This argument can touch some nerves, as it were. But look, all I'm doing is seeking the truth. So if a view makes it impossible to possess knowledge, then as Victor Reppert has noted, this view is a prime candidate for rejection. So my argument is simply based upon logic, and it's not emotional. What it does do, however, is show that Calvinists who are not willing to give up their view in the face of a defeater are probably too emotional about their dearly held beliefs. Uh, it was hard for me to give up Calvinism because so many of my pastors and favorite authors were these Calvinists, and I was kind of raised in that environment, and plus I just thought for so long, so many years, I gave sermons on the topic about it. I thought it was true, and it wasn't just a assent to a proposition. It was I did have some emotional attachment to it, so it was hard for me to let it go when I finally realized and saw all these problems with it, really problems that I think ultimately make it a different gospel. But my argument, I'm not trying to touch people's nerves or pull their heartstrings or getting emotional with them. I'm simply trying to be logical. So yeah, I mean, I gotta say that I do really enjoy discussing this with other PhD philosophers and theologians, and I got the opportunity to do that not too long ago at the Evangelical Philosophical Society meeting, as I noted earlier. And many of these philosophers in that room were Calvinists and determinists, but they're also professionals. They're professional thinkers who are trained in how to have these conversations and to bracket their emotions. And I could tell some of them were getting a little hot under the collar, and I saw some of their faces getting a little red during my talk. I was trying to be as nice as possible about it, because I know that it has this effect on people sometimes. But you know what? All these guys, these men and women who were in that room with me, they all took their feelings captive and interacted with me as a professional scholar, right? It was always respectful and cordial. It was always logical. And, no one stopped thinking with their mind and only argued with their emotions. It didn't happen like that. No one was accused on either end of being stupid or uneducated. This is what you're going to see from Facebook philosophers and YouTube theologians when they're going to start hurling things like, that's a stupid argument, or you're just uneducated, blah, blah, blah. No, just deal with ideas, deal with premises of arguments. That's why I love speaking at philosophy and theology conferences with other peers. That's a nice retreat from the internet, but we also have an internet ministry. So that's why we're making videos like this. So I like swimming in both ponds, I guess, and both pools. And I do enjoy having these conversations, these deep academic conversations with other PhDs. But as a former pastor and even a former youth pastor, if I can't take those ideas and bring them to the real world, then I feel like it's kind of a waste of time. So I try to go back and forth between worlds. And sometimes that's tricky, but that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and I see that, and I think you do it well. One thing I will say in relation to this particular, I don't know if it's an objection or just an objection to your disposition, I guess, not to your argument. One thing I will say is it is often frustrating and can be emotional when somebody is passionately arguing against something you hold dear. Yeah. And we've all experienced that. And I'll take it to the most ridiculous and ridiculous place so that it's not in these deep theological waters. It's like being a Nebraska fan and then meeting someone who's an Iowa fan who vehemently argues that Nebraska stinks, and sometimes they do, but that and they're vehemently arguing against your fandom. And they might even be saying true things like, Nebraska's only beaten Iowa one time out of the last 7 years or whatever. And it just kind of gets under your skin. And so
you say, how many national championships do we have? How many do you have?
Yes, exactly. And so I get that there's kind of a visceral reaction when you get this with atheists too, when atheists are saying things that we think are kind of ridiculous about our God. We should have a little bit of an offense there, but then we have to deal with the argument, not just with someone's or their passion at which they speak their argument. So you and I have different dispositions, and I think both are needed. We had our friend Richard Suttles on the show about a little while ago, and one of the things that he said at the end was very interesting. He was like, "Hey, if you're a diplomat, be a diplomat, but if you're somebody who wants to just, address things as they are, go do that. Don't be somebody else." And I think that's true. And if people can't engage with those different types of people, I think that's on them. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, if you are offended by something, it's probably best to say, hey, by the way, you offended me when you said this. I know that wasn't your intent. And then have that conversation rather than saying you appeal to emotion. You're just so emotional, because then that could be thrown right back at you. Yeah. Like, okay, your appeal to emotion is emotional. So now what do we do now? So those are just some thoughts.
I think those are right on the money. And, like you said, we do have different dispositions and personality types, and there's room in philosophy and theology for every personality type. What there's not room for is not being logical in your thinking. And so some of us, I can be, just naturally maybe a little bit more animated or excited when I talk about things that I really get, that I really care about, and other people look like they're about ready to fall asleep. That's not, that's just because we're wired differently. And it's part of what makes humanity beautiful, is these different personality types and learning how to interact with one another. But yeah, I think sometimes people will hold it against another person because of their personality type. Again, don't get distracted by that stuff. deal with the arguments, and let's stay logical. And well, you know what we like to say when we sign off.
Yes, we do, and we'll do that shortly.
Okay. Okay.
But first,
I was setting it up for you.
I know you were. I know you were, but I had something that popped into my head here. One more thing where I was going to say, I think part of the reaction is when people say things like, well, that seems illogical or that's unreasonable. It feels like a character attack, but it's not. It's an attack on. It is an attack on how you're dealing with things mentally, and it's to say, hey, make sure you're not being illogical here. And we all want to claim to be the most logical person in the room, and so then it feels a little bit emotional. So anyway, instead of taking those things so seriously and personally, we should probably just do the thing that we always say. What you were trying to set me up with, we should probably just stay reasonable.